first came a few years ago and listened to her story and saw what she's done and got the reports from all the effort she's put out. And she has not been back in the hospital for a year and a half. And I hope she'll share some of what she's doing. And I understand that surfing is really helping out a lot. So with that, let's welcome Melissa.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, welcome to the 7th annual In a Garden of Cystic Fibrosis fundraiser benefiting the Living Breath Foundation. Thank you all for being here. And we'd like to start tonight off with a moment of silence just to remember the members of our CF community and Living Breath family that we've lost. What the Living Breath Foundation does for the cystic fibrosis, or you'll hear a lot, CF community. CF is a degenerative genetic disease. It primarily affects the lungs and pancreas. There are currently 30,000 people in the United States living with CF. Right now, the life expectancy is in the low 40s, and there's currently no cure. It's a very complex disease, and to explain it to everybody is very difficult to do very simply, but I'll try. One of the main problems that people with this disease have is everyone has mucus in their body, and primarily in your lungs. And our mucus is genetically thicker, which causes a really great breeding ground for bacteria. And where bacteria are, that leads to infections, which causes lung damage, which causes loss of lung function, which ultimately causes lung failure. So there's all sorts of things and ways it affects the bodies, but that's a large reason that it's such a terrible disease. So the daily life for someone with cystic fibrosis when they're healthy is a couple hours of therapy every day. This includes respiratory therapy, inhaled medications, and countless pills. I really like to stress that there's no breaks with this disease. The handful of people in this room that have CF are most likely going to go home and do an hour of medication before they can go to bed tonight. Once you get sick, you're often hospitalized 4 weeks at a time, and you'll undergo IV medications and increased treatments. Like I said, loss of lung function leads to lung failure, and that's when people are faced with the decision of whether or not to pursue getting a lung transplant. Taking care of yourself with this disease is a full-time job. You can do everything right, and the disease is still going to have its course. It's ruthless, it's unforgiving, it'll kick you when it's down, and it's tough, it's challenging. It's also a very expensive disease. There are so many things that aren't covered by insurance. And a large population, especially of the adults, are unable to work. They're taking care of themselves full-time, and they're living on disability and SSI. So that's a really hard thing for people to decide. To stop working, you give up a lot of your individuality, you give up a lot of your independence, and a lot of your financial security. So, excuse me. Just think about this. How many people in this room think that they could live off of $890 a month in California? Now put yourself in the shoes of someone with CF. You have $890 to live. What if you have to go to the doctor at Stanford 3 times this month? How are you going to pay for gas? What if you have to get a medication that your doctor thinks is really going to help you, but your insurance doesn't cover it? How are you going to pay for it? What if you've been in the hospital and you can't make your rent? How are you going to pay for it? Where do you go for help? You go to the Living Breath Foundation. The Living Breath Foundation was founded by Chris and Lori Papatorius in 2008, and they were seeing the financial burden that was placed on their family, for my brother and I, and all the extra expenses that came along with the disease. And there's just very few resources for people in the CF community, especially adults. I think that's just because there's only 30,000 of us in the United States, and it used to be a childhood disease because people didn't live into adulthood, so there's just less resources. They primarily wanted to help the individual. We donate to research, we donate to other organizations, but we really want to help individuals who are struggling through hard times because there's so few resources. There's been many programs that have been developed in the last 7 years for our foundation. We do scholarships, which is money that goes towards the extra expenses of CF while pursuing higher education. When I went to college, I needed a single dorm room with a sink, which was the most expensive dorm room. You also need closer parking, you need to be able to have a car to get to doctor's appointments. All of that stuff adds up. Also, we have our financial assistance program, which is pretty broad, but to give you an example of some of the things we've done this year, we helped 2 different families with a CF member relocate because of the Yosemite Rim fire, where they were unable to live in their homes for 6 weeks because the air quality was too bad. We helped with emergency assistance for a transplant patient who was on vacation and had to be put on a ventilator in Hawaii, and we helped her family with the costs of staying in Hawaii so that she was not on her own. We helped an individual move out of an apartment because of mold that was exacerbating her symptoms. We've helped with rental supplementation for a hospital while someone was at a hospital stay. So financial assistance grants cover the full spectrum of different situations that people face with this disease. We also have a transplant assistance program, which is newer in the last couple years, and this helps with people who need to relocate to be closer to a hospital to have a transplant, with their travel expenses to go to a different hospital for evaluations to see if they can have a transplant, moving expenses. There's so many expenses that aren't related to the actual surgery that need to be in place before you're even placed on a lung transplant list. We can help with those things. Sadly, we also have a end-of-life assistance program, which helps with hospice care and sometimes funeral expenses. Smaller programs we have are gas cards and care packages that are dispensed to the adult cystic fibrosis social worker at Stanford. And the gas cards make a huge difference. People who are strapped for cash, who are driving 4 hours to go to the doctor, it eases the burden of getting to their appointment. And care packages are pretty self-explanatory, but when you're an adult, you're all grown up. There's not somebody coming by with games to your room. You're in the hospital for 2 weeks at a time, and you don't have a visitor every day. Our social worker has something to give out to the adults if they're having a hard time to, send them a little love. So all of these examples of aids I just gave you are things we've done in 2014. So we've given out aids for every single thing that I just said in the last 6 months. We're really helping individuals. So currently, in our area, nobody else is helping individuals in the CF community in this way besides the Living Breath Foundation. And I always wonder, if we weren't here, where would these people go? Who would help them? And what would the Living Breath Foundation do without all of your support? So tonight, I think it's really important that we keep in mind that the funds we're raising are making sure that these people have somewhere to go for support, and for these people to be focusing on their health and not worrying about their expenses. So I have kind of a cool announcement. Last year at this dinner, the Living Breath Foundation hit the $1 million mark in fundraising. Working towards our $2 million mark, so I hope that everybody's enthusiastic and ready to bid, and I'm going to bring my dad up here, and he's going to say a few things. But thank you all for coming, and I just appreciate you guys being here.